Welcome back to Bay Area Focus. We are sitting down with local author Martha Conway to discuss her new work, The Underground River. It's a book that draws heavily on the past and has some connections to America today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so tell us about The Underground River. What is this about?
Well, it starts off with a young seamstress, a costume designer, and her name is May Bedlow. And she's traveling on a steamboat with her cousin, who's an actress, and the steamboat sinks, it explodes. It's based on a real steamboat, the Moselle, that was sort of like the Titanic of the time. It was a huge accident off of Cincinnati, right off of Cincinnati, and on the Ohio River. And May gets a job on a riverboat theater going down the Ohio River. And the Ohio River in antebellum America was the natural division between the North and the South, the free states and the slave-owning states. So May, over the course of one summer, gets blackmailed into helping with the Underground Railroad.
Wow. Why was this story so important for you to tell? Because it is, you know, you're using some historical events that are going on, and of course, yeah, the Underground Railroad too, but it's fiction.
It is fiction. As I say, there's one real event, the sinking of the Moselle, and then the rest I made up. I'm from Ohio, so I was drawn to this idea of a riverboat theater going down the Ohio River, and the fact that there was runaway slaves crossing the Ohio River to get to freedom. That just adds to the drama. So I really wanted to tell that story. And I wanted to tell the story of a person who doesn't initially have ideas or thoughts about slavery. She was raised in the North, and I wanted to sort of chronicle how she changes and how a person goes from being a bystander to being an active participant.
How does it relate to the America we live in today? Because there is some connection.
Yeah, well, I have to say that after the election last November, I did look at my book again. I looked at it a little differently. I think we all were looking at some things in our lives a little differently, and I really saw how it was a novel about somebody who sees that there's something very wrong in the world and decides that she has to step up and do something. And I think that for a lot of people, we might vote and we might have opinions, but we don't necessarily we don't necessarily work for change in an active sort of way. So I think this is the chronicle of one woman and how that changes for her.
So because of the historical aspect, I'm sure you had to do a lot of research.
Yes.
What was that like? Pretty intense?
I love doing research, I have to say. That's part of my fun of writing a novel. And I always really feel like I know the story a little bit better when I'm reading somebody's memoir, somebody's journal that takes place in that time. So yeah, there was a lot of research, and luckily there are great library systems and the internet to help me along.
And part of this research, you're learning about the history of this country and maybe some ugly things too. What was the hardest part about writing this book?
I think the hardest part was because I read so much about people's real beliefs at the time, and I try to do research reading books that take place at that time. It was hard for me to get around the idea that some people really didn't have a problem with slavery, even if they were on the north side of the river. And a lot of people had rationalizations that I couldn't really understand, but I felt like I needed to chronicle those too.
And the book kind of centers on, you touched on it, it's acting troupe, right? It's this floating theater, this acting troupe. What role would you have played in that?
Well, I think that I've always been drawn to roles that are like the quirky next-door neighbor or the bossy older sister. I think those would be the roles that would be really fun to play.
Yeah, that would be fun. And May, what is May like?
May is very literal-minded. She's been told all of her life she has no sense of humor. Some of the readers that I've had have asked me if she's on the spectrum, as we say today. Of course, back then they didn't have any language for someone who was sort of socially awkward, maybe didn't look you in the eye all the time, but she has a big heart, and she does have an imagination which blooms as the story progresses.
I think it's always interesting talking to authors and knowing that they are so creative and coming up with these characters in these different worlds. Do you feel drawn to develop characters that are more like you or less like you, or maybe like someone in your life?
I think that it's easier if it's less like me, because if it's too much like me, I don't want anything bad to happen to me. So, and you need to have bad things happen to your character sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Any new authors or books that you've been reading lately? What does an author read?
Well, at the moment I'm reading, I always have a couple of books going, and the books that I'm reading now, The New Mystery by Cara Black, who's also a Bay Area native, San Francisco writer. She has a great series set in Paris. And The Necklace by Claire McMillan.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I like that, and I like that you support the local authors, too. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Underground River. Just log on to marthaconway.com to get your copy of Underground River. And next up, this is exciting. We have a food truck serving up some amazing and very healthy dishes. We'll be right back.